Welcome back to the Selling Sanctuary, where feminine power meets $1,000,000 psychology. I'm your host, Mika B, and we are going to talk about how childhood wounds show up in sales. We kind of touched on this with the trauma responses, but I want to give you a little more information on how your actual environment when you are a child creates your trauma responses, because I didn't really explain that. So on this one, we're going to explain it. We're going to start with the flight response, and that is like constantly changing your strategy. You tend to abandon launches midway when they are not producing the engagement or the numbers, monetization that you expected. You can be constantly changing your content pillars. You can always you say oh, I'm gonna start over, I'm gonna revamp myself, I'm gonna come up with a whole new business and different things. You could be picking a ton of products in your TikTok shop that have really no, they're not in a niche, they have no association with each other, so it's just kind of all over the place. You jump the trends without checking alignment, and it's really you have this fear of failing. And this is all from a childhood that usually contained emotional unavailability, which means you weren't given the freedom of expression, freedom of speech. You weren't allowed to even really probably show your emotions. So you tend to flee the situation, the confrontation of whatever sort, which tends to also be mental and emotional abuse and or neglect. You kind of just leave the situation, you just run. And that keeps you in a flight response when it comes to your sales as well. So it also shows up when you're door to door, when someone you might say something about a product that your company is offering, and the minute you kind of sense any type of hostility, you're just okay, you know what, have a great day, and you just walk away. That could also be what it looks like when you have a flight response in sales. The journal prompt for the flight response would definitely be, what are you afraid of receiving, right? Because a lot of times we abandon because we think we're going to receive aggression. We might, receive some type of physical altercation. And because you're probably kind of anti-unknown, meaning you don't like when you can't see a clear path, you might be actually afraid of receiving your success. You might be afraid of receiving the amount of sales that you needed for that week to earn the commission that was your goal. So it's important for you to really ask yourself, what am I afraid of receiving? And also remembering that you never fail until you quit, right? So you can't have a fear of failure when you only fail when you just completely give up. And this is a journey. This entire experience, this human experience, is a journey. It is important for you to constantly give yourself grace, to forgive yourself, and to be able to move forward. And I would also say that if you are a Bible believer, then it's also important to remember Spirit doesn't want you to have fear. Fear and love cannot exist. They can't coexist. So I think one time I read that there was 365 scriptures that told you not to fear when they've combined them all. So it was almost a daily reminder from God not to be afraid. Just remember that fear is just your imagination of what could be happening, and really, I would always say, like, what you're afraid of, move through the fear. Because again, like, it's just your nervous system saying, like, this is dangerous. But again, we talked about in other videos how what your nervous system perceives as dangerous is typically what you want, and it's just opposite of what your childhood has been. So that's really important. And I think we touched on that in episode 3, if you didn't hear that one. But we're also going to move on to the freeze response. And the freeze response can actually come from physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional, and mental abuse. It's very, very common in children with environments with like physical, like domestic violence, physical abuse, to either the children or the like partner, and alcoholism. And that comes from just really shut down, not being allowed to express your emotions. It's definitely emotional unavailability, but it's almost like trauma. Like it's just emphasized on trauma, because typically it was like something really, really traumatic happened, and then you were completely shut down of like even responding, because you just had to like you just couldn't even process it. Like it was just so traumatic that you couldn't process it, and you just stood there and you froze. And remember that how this shows up in your sales that we touched on in episode 3 is that you have offers, but you never promote them. You spend hours planning and you never execute. You could just, distract yourself with like busy work, a whole bunch of things that's not going to monetize you and not going to push you closer to your monetization goals. You can feel overwhelmed and just completely avoid your platform altogether. And I want you to remember that like freeze is not laziness. It is actually a trauma response. So when you feel like, I don't want to do anything else, I don't want to create anymore, I don't want to do this, you really need to be like, wait a second. What am I not allowing myself to feel? Because it could be that like you're not allowing yourself to actually just feel the emotions of being able to rest, of forgiving yourself, of forgiving the people who probably caused the trauma to begin with, of not allowing yourself, not trusting yourself, and not allowing yourself grace to take rest, to take breaks, to pivot when you need to. And it's like you don't want to make any decisions because you're afraid of making the wrong decisions. And this is a self-trust issue. You can trust in source. You can trust in God. You can trust yourself. And we've been programmed not to trust ourselves, not to listen to intuition, right? But you have to actually turn that off, because that is literally just a trauma response. You're safe. Always ground yourself. Put your hand over your heart. I am safe. It's safe for me to be seen. It's safe for me to be heard. It's safe for me to sell. It's safe for me to provide service to other people. The next trauma response would be fawn. And fawn typically has a childhood where they just overcompensated to keep the peace. I would say a lot of times that would be like related to emotional and mental abuse, or just complete emotional neglect, where you're non-confrontational. So you're just, in order to like appease people, and what you might do is like through energetic entanglement, you might actually attract clients where they're aggressive. They remind you of that caregiver that you overcompensated to. And in that way, your trauma response of that actually plays out in your sales. And you end up offering too much value for free. You fear pricing too high or setting boundaries. You say yes to things that drain you because you lack boundaries, because you're afraid of people, because you're pleasing people. You're afraid of people judging you. You're afraid of being rejected. You feel guilty for charging for your work, and you tend to seek validation over alignment, because that is how you receive, basically overgiving was how you received affection as a child. And you're bringing that into your sales. And it's important for you to really, check that. And the next one we're going to do fight. I'm going to just go ahead and end this now. So be sure that you check out the guide if you love this type of content. And until next time, my friends, happy selling and sharing.